If you could save time in a bottle, what would you do with it? It's a question we've all asked ourselves, a wistful, universal dream. To capture the perfect moments, to preserve the fading light of a golden afternoon, to hold on to the laughter of a loved one just a little bit longer. It's a fantasy of having just enough time to do all the things you want to do, enough time to be with the ones you love. There was a man who captured that feeling, that beautiful, impossible wish, and turned it into one of the most beloved songs ever written. He was a man with a friendly handlebar mustache, a twinkle in his eye, and a voice that felt like an old friend telling you a story on a back porch. He sang about characters so real you felt you knew them: truck drivers, pool sharks, lovers, and dreamers. He was the quintessential everyman, a storyteller who, after years of struggle, had finally found his audience. His name was Jim Croce. And in a cruel, almost literary twist of fate, the man who sang so beautifully about wanting more time would be given so heartbreakingly little. Just as his star was reaching its brightest point in the sky, just as he was on the verge of the life he had always dreamed of, a single tragic moment on a dark Louisiana night froze his time forever. This is the story of the plane crash that killed Jim Croce, but it's also the story of the life that led him there, a life of hard work, deep love, and unforgettable music. It's the story of how a regular guy from South Philly became a voice for a generation, and how in the end, his music accomplished the very thing he never could. It saved time in a bottle, preserving his warmth, his wit, and his heart for all of us. To understand Jim Croce, you have to understand the world his music came from. The early 1970s was a time of transition in America. The psychedelic haze and political fury of the late 1960s were beginning to fade, giving way to something more introspective, more personal. It was the dawn of the singer-songwriter era. Artists like James Taylor, Carole King, and Joni Mitchell were turning inward, crafting deeply personal anthems from the sun-drenched canyons of Laurel Canyon. But Jim Croce's voice came from somewhere else entirely. It didn't come from the hills of Hollywood. It came from the gritty working-class neighborhoods of South Philadelphia. It was shaped not by counterculture communes, but by truck stops, construction sites, and rowdy corner bars. Croce wasn't singing about abstract spiritual awakenings. He was singing about the lives of the people he knew, the characters he'd met, the struggles and small joys of everyday existence. Born in 1943 to a working-class Italian-American family, Jim grew up surrounded by storytellers. His world was one of vibrant, expressive people who worked hard and loved deeply. He was a bright, funny kid who picked up the accordion at age 5 before teaching himself to play a guitar he bought for $20. Music was his passion, but a career in it seemed like a distant dream. His parents, like many of their generation, encouraged him to get a proper education to find a stable profession. He went to Villanova University, where he formed bands and played at fraternity parties, honing his craft. He was a DJ at the campus radio station, where he developed the warm, engaging persona that would later charm his concert audiences. It was at a party that he met a bright, artistic young woman named Ingrid Jacobson. They fell in love, and soon they were not just a couple but a musical duo playing folk songs in the coffee houses and bars of Philadelphia. Jim was the heart and the humor. Ingrid was the soul and the harmony. They were a perfect match, personally and professionally, dreaming of a life making music together. This was the foundation of everything that was to come: a love for music, a love for each other, and a deep-seated connection to the stories of ordinary people. The road to success is rarely a straight line, and for Jim and Ingrid Croce, it was a long and winding path filled with detours, disappointments, and a whole lot of hard labor. In the late 1960s, they decided to take their shot at the big time. Encouraged by a record producer, they moved to New York City to record their first album, simply titled Jim and Ingrid Croce. They poured their hearts into it, a collection of gentle, heartfelt folk songs. But the album, released in 1969, landed with a thud. It went nowhere. The dream of making a living with their music seemed to be slipping through their fingers. Disillusioned and broke, they sold all but one of their guitars and retreated from the New York music scene, moving to a quiet farm in rural Pennsylvania. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. But for Jim Croce, it was just the beginning of his education. The years that followed were his crucible. To support his wife and soon their new baby boy, Adrian James, or AJ, Jim took on a series of grueling, back-breaking jobs. This wasn't a romantic, starving artist phase. This was the hard reality of paying the bills. He woke up before dawn to work on construction crews. His hands, meant for intricate guitar work, becoming calloused from hauling equipment. He drove dump trucks, spending long, lonely hours on the road, observing the world from behind a dusty windshield. He worked at welding shops and lumber yards. These jobs weren't just a way to make money. They were a gold mine of inspiration. Every day he was surrounded by the very characters who would come to populate his songs. He listened to their stories, their boasts, their heartaches. He saw the quiet dignity in their labor and the humor in their struggles, the tough guys with soft hearts, the dreamers stuck in dead-end jobs, the lovers trying to make it work against the odds. They all became part of his creative DNA. During the day, he was one of them, a working man trying to make a living. But at night, exhausted as he would pick up that one remaining guitar and turn his experiences into songs. He wrote about what he knew, and his knowledge of the human condition was growing deeper with every long, hard day. This period of struggle, as difficult as it was the very thing that made his art so authentic and so incredibly relatable. Every great storyteller needs a partner, someone who can help them shape their narrative and bring it to life. For Jim Croce, that person was a quiet, prodigiously talented guitarist named Maury Muleisen. Jim had met Maury, a classically trained musician from New Jersey, through a mutual friend. When he heard Maury play, something clicked. Maury wasn't just a sideman, he was a musical soulmate. His intricate melodic guitar playing was the perfect complement to Jim's rhythmic, grounded style. Maury's lead lines were like a second voice, weaving in and out of Jim's lyrics, adding layers of emotion and beauty. He could make his guitar sing with a sweetness and complexity that elevated Jim's straightforward folk songs into something truly special. It was a partnership born of pure musical chemistry. With Maury by his side, Jim's confidence surged. He had a new sound, a new energy. He also had a growing collection of incredible new songs born from his years of working and observing. A friend urged him to send a demo tape to two producers in New York, Terry Cashman and Tommy West. Cashman and West were former musicians themselves, and when they heard Jim's tape, they knew they had found something extraordinary. Here was a voice that was honest, a perspective that was unique, and songs that were instant classics. They signed Jim to their production company, and in 1972, he was signed to ABC Records. After years of grinding it out on construction sites and highways, Jim Croce was finally getting his second chance. The result was his third studio album, a record that would change his life forever, You Don't Mess Around with Jim. The album was a runaway success. The title track, a fun, rollicking story about a formidable pool shark, shot up the charts. It was followed by Operator, That's Not the Way It Feels, a heartbreakingly beautiful ballad of lost love that showcased his incredible emotional depth. Suddenly, Jim Croce, the truck-driving folk singer from Philly, was a star. The rocket ride to fame was exhilarating. His next album, Life and Times, released in 1973, was even bigger. It contained the song that would become his signature anthem, the story of a charismatic brawler from the south side of Chicago who was the baddest man in the whole damn town. Bad Leroy Brown went all the way to #1 on the Billboard charts. Jim Croce had finally made it. He was a household name, his songs a constant presence on the radio. But this meteoric rise came at a steep and ultimately tragic price. Fame for Jim Croce was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was the validation he had worked so hard for. He was finally able to provide for his family with his music, but on the other hand, the demands of stardom were relentless and soul-crushing. The music industry, eager to capitalize on its new star, put him on a grueling, non-stop treadmill. His life became a blur of airports, hotel rooms, television studios, and concert halls. He was constantly on the road, performing almost every single night. While he was a natural and charming performer who loved connecting with his audience, the endless travel and separation from his family began to wear him down. He was a homebody at heart, a devoted husband and father who was desperately missing the two people who mattered most to him, his wife Ingrid and his young son, AJ. This is the rarely discussed, deeply poignant side of his success story. While the world saw a star on the rise, his letters and phone calls home told a different tale. He wrote to Ingrid about his exhaustion, his loneliness, his growing disillusionment with the music business. He felt like a product, a commodity being sold, and he hated it. The irony was crushing. He had worked all those hard jobs so he could one day have a life where he could be with his family, and now his dream job was the very thing keeping him away from them. The most famous story about this period, and the one that perfectly captures his state of mind, is the genesis of his most iconic song. Just before his career took off, Ingrid told him she was pregnant. That night, sitting at their kitchen table, he wrote, "Time in a Bottle." The song wasn't just a sweet sentiment, it was a deeply personal prayer. He was a man about to become a father, staring into an uncertain future, and all he wanted was more time to savor the moments he knew were coming. He wrote, "If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you." Now, just a couple of years later, he was living the tragic paradox of that song. He had all the success in the world, but no time to enjoy it. He wrote to Ingrid that he was done. After this tour, he was quitting the road. He wanted to buy a small farm, settle down, maybe write short stories or movie scripts. More than anything, he just wanted to be a husband and a father. He wanted to watch his little boy grow up. He had a plan to finally step off the treadmill. He was just a few weeks away from the end of the tour, a few weeks away from the quiet life he so desperately craved. September 20th, 1973, the town of Natchitoches, Louisiana. It was a small college town, just another stop on a long and exhausting tour. Jim and his band, including his brilliant musical partner Maury Muleisen, had just played a show at Northwestern State University. The performance was well received, but the mood was subdued. Everyone was tired. They had been on the road for months, and they were all eager to get home. Their next stop was in Sherman, Texas. Because of the distance, they had chartered a small twin-engine Beechcraft, E-18S, to fly them there. The night was dark and hazy. There was no fog, but the air was thick with humidity and visibility was not perfect. The group, consisting of Jim, Maury, comedian George Stevens, who was their opening act, manager Kenneth Cortese, road manager Dennis Rast, and the pilot Robert Elliott, boarded the small plane at the Natchitoches Regional Airport. The airport was a small rural strip. The runway was just long enough, but it offered little room for error. The plane taxied to the end of the runway, its engines roaring in the quiet Louisiana night. It began its takeoff roll, gathering speed. But something was wrong. The plane wasn't climbing as it should. It lifted off the ground, but it remained dangerously low, struggling to gain altitude. At the end of the runway stood a single, large pecan tree, a dark silhouette against the hazy sky. The plane, flying too low and too slow, headed directly for it. In the final horrific seconds, the left wing of the Beechcraft clipped the top of the tree. The impact sent the plane careening out of control. It crashed into the ground just a few hundred yards past the runway, erupting in a devastating wreck of twisted metal. There were no survivors. Jim Croce was just 30 years old. His gifted partner, Maury Muleisen, was only 24. In an instant, the music stopped. The stories were over. The man who just wanted to go home had run out of time. His life cut short at the very moment he was planning to finally start living it. The subsequent investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board concluded the crash was the result of pilot error. But a deeper, more tragic detail emerged. The 57-year-old pilot, Robert Elliott, was found to have severe coronary artery disease. He had failed an aviation medical exam just a few months prior and had a history of heart trouble. It is widely believed, though impossible to prove with certainty, that he suffered a massive heart attack during the critical moments of takeoff, either losing consciousness or becoming so disoriented that he was unable to control the aircraft. It was a senseless, almost random tragedy, a perfect storm of exhaustion, bad luck, and human fragility that silenced one of music's most promising voices. In the wake of such a beloved figure's death, there are rarely controversies in the scandalous sense. Jim Croce was, by all accounts, a good and decent man. The controversy, if one can call it that, is quieter and more systemic. It lies in the very nature of the music industry that both built him up and wore him down. The debate centers on the relentless pressures of the album-tour-album cycle that is the lifeblood of the music business. Jim Croce was an authentic, organic artist. His genius was in observing life, processing it, and turning it into art. But the moment he became a commercial success, there was no more time for observation. There was only time for promotion. He was caught in a machine that demanded he constantly produce and perform, leaving no space for the very life experiences that fueled his creativity. Was Jim Croce a victim of a system that often chews up and spits out its most sensitive and authentic talents? Many who were close to him believe so. The industry saw a golden goose and wanted as many golden eggs as possible, as quickly as possible, without considering the health of the bird. His desire to quit the road can be seen as an act of self-preservation, an attempt to escape a system he felt was draining the life from him, long before the plane crash did. Another, more subtle debate revolves around his musical identity. His biggest hits, You Don't Mess Around with Jim and Bad Bad Leroy Brown, were fun, character-driven novelty songs. They were what made him a pop star. But many argue that the true heart of his work lay in his more introspective, folk-leaning ballads like Operator, Photographs and Memories, and New York's Not My Home. There was a fear that the record label would continue to push him in the more commercial Leroy Brown direction, potentially sanding down the edges of the very thing that made him special, his nuanced, empathetic storytelling. We will never know what direction he would have taken, what masterpieces he had yet to write. The tragedy of his death is not just the loss of the man, but the loss of his entire future evolution as an artist. The consequences of the crash on that dark Louisiana night were immediate and heartbreakingly ironic. The day after his death, September 21st, 1973, ABC Records released the lead single from his forthcoming fifth album. The title of that song was I Got a Name. It was a song of pride, identity, and forward momentum, a declaration of selfhood that now served as an unintended eulogy. The album of the same name was released a few weeks later, and the public, grieving the loss of this warm and familiar voice, rushed to buy it. And then the most poignant chapter of the story unfolded. A movie producer, wanting to use time in a bottle in a TV movie about a young woman with a terminal illness, began to generate renewed interest in the song. It was released as a single, and in the final week of 1973, 3 months after his death, Time in a Bottle went to number 1. The song that was a private prayer for more time with his family became a public anthem of mourning and loss, topping the charts from beyond the grave. Jim Croce's music, far from fading away, became more popular than ever. He had 3 gold albums in the year following his death. His songs became a permanent fixture on the radio, a time capsule of a talent that was just reaching its full magnificent power. His significance lies in his unique position as the poet laureate of the working man. He wasn't a protest singer or a psychedelic visionary. He was a chronicler of everyday lives, and he gave a voice to people who are rarely represented in popular music. He made the ordinary feel extraordinary. His legacy is one of authenticity, humor, and a deep, abiding empathy for the human condition. That legacy was carried on with incredible strength by his wife Ingrid, who managed his estate, raised their son, and eventually opened a beloved restaurant in San Diego in his honor. And it lives on through his son A.J. Croce, who, after overcoming his own childhood blindness, became a successful singer-songwriter in his own right, a gifted musician who carries his father's artistic spirit into a new generation. In the end, the story of Jim Croce is one of profound and beautiful irony. He wrote and sang about wanting to save time in a bottle, a wish he, more than anyone, deserved to have granted. He never got the chance to spend those saved-up days with his family, to watch his son grow, to enjoy the quiet life he had worked so hard to earn. He ran out of time, but what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that he had succeeded in his quest after all. He left behind his own time capsules. Each one of his songs is a perfectly preserved moment. When you listen to Bad, Bad Leroy Brown, you're in a smoky bar, watching a charismatic troublemaker hold court. When you hear Operator, you're standing at a payphone feeling the universal ache of a love that's gone. His music freezes a feeling, a character, a story. Jim Croce never got to save time for himself, but he did it for us. Every time we put on one of his records, every time his warm, friendly voice comes over the radio, we are opening one of his bottles. And inside we find a moment of humor, a flash of insight, a pang of heartbreak, a deep and comforting humanity, frozen perfectly and saved for all time. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.